Episode 7. Even though she wasn't exposed due to her long sun jacket, but having their woman being looked at so bluntly would still make any man unhappy. Chen Xinan slapped her springy hips and scolded her. Hurry and get up. Go back to the hotel and get changed. Who are you trying to seduce in those clothes? Wasn't he the one who chose this outfit for her? Xin Haoyue glared at him. She didn't even feel like talking to him anymore. After walking a few steps behind him, she grumbled, You're obviously just jealous. Chen Xinan, who was walking at the front, stopped and turned back to stare at her, asking, What did you say? Xin Haoyue quickly shot him a sweet smile. Nothing. After the two returned to their hotel and took a shower, they didn't really have any plans after lunch. Feeling quite bored, Xin Haoyue thought about the suggestion that man gave them earlier. Why don't we go look at the wedding? With people like that man around here, how high-end could a wedding from this sort of place be? Xin Haoyue was speechless for a moment, but then she rose up to refute his statement. You're just being unreasonable. Chen Xinan shot a glance at her in response. He couldn't be bothered to argue. However, he still brought her out to see the wedding. The theme of the wedding was 100 flowers. The decorations of the venue was very romantic. Xin Haoyue felt that if the bride and groom were just a bit more pleasing to the eyes, then it wouldn't hurt the visual experience as much. After they recounted the long and sweet process of them meeting each other, all the way to falling in love and getting married, Xin Haoyue said to Chen Xinan cheerfully, Even though the two of them just got married after their blind date a year ago, how do they still have so much to talk about in between? Chen Xinan agreed with her. Yeah, they're not as pitiful as I am. Xin Haoyue, who was looking quietly at the bride and groom on the stage, her intuition told her that she should probably remain silent right now. The climax of every wedding was the tossing of a bouquet by the bride. Xin Haoyue, who had never participated in anyone's wedding, wanted to join in for some fun. However, before she could even do anything, she ended up being pulled out of the crowd by Chen Xinan. Xin Haoyue struggled for a bit before finally getting out of his hold. What are you doing? Mrs. Chen, should I remind you that you're already married? Xin Haoyue pouted at his words and replied, Then I won't catch it, I'll just watch at the side. Chen Xinan smirked. Mrs. Chen, do you really like flowers so much because you want to get married again? Xin Haoyue deliberately teased him. Well, if I'm going to get married again, then it has to be with a different groom, you know? To keep things fresh. Chen Xinan gritted his teeth and reached out, wanting to grab her. However, she quickly evaded him. President Chen, let's go have a walk somewhere else. Chen Xinan looked at her, and in the end, he only chuckled helplessly. Xin Haoyue stopped to browse every so often as they walked. They finally halted when they saw a shop that looked quite historical and antique. She couldn't stop herself from looking around. Out of all these buildings in this area, this was the most distinctive of them all. Xin Haoyue looked at the name and subconsciously read it out. See into Fate and Destiny. After reading it out, she was just about to mention how mysterious the name was when she suddenly remembered what the man at the beach said to her. With a grin, she looked at Chen Xinan and opened her mouth. I didn't think such a place was here. When Chen Xinan saw the name, he didn't feel too good about it. Just as he was about to tell her that these were all scams, he saw a humpbacked old man walk out from inside. That muscles on the old man's face were sagging, but those eyes of his, which held a glint of amber, was still particularly sharp. Xin Haoyue looked at him, and before she could say anything, she heard the man ask them, Sir, Madam, why don't you come inside for some fortune-telling? Why don't the two of you come inside for some fortune-telling? As the elderly man stared at the both of them, his amber-colored eyes attracted many people's attention. Xin Haoyue slightly widened her eyes at his words. She didn't understand what was happening. Didn't people say that this remarkable and powerful elderly man rarely tells fortune for people? Xin Haoyue had never held superstitious beliefs towards these unreliable matters, but she was still very curious. Therefore, when her gaze landed on Chen Xinan, she wanted to inquire with him. However, his gaze was darkening. It was rare for him to reply in a polite and respectful tone. Many thanks, but we don't need it. Chen Xinan took a step forward and held Xin Haoyue's hand. He was about to leave. That was when he heard the elderly man say in a firm voice, Soulless body. Huh? These random words made Xin Haoyue pause her footsteps. She pulled Chen Xinan to a stop and turned around to look at the elderly man. The elderly man's amber eyes were bright and shocking. Xin Haoyue even noticed that she didn't need to observe closely in order to see the wrinkles within the beautiful pupils of his eyes. Before Xin Haoyue could finish her words, she watched on as the elderly man glanced at Chen Xinan, directing his words at him. As time flies, one will know where they belong to in the future. You guys are not fated, and you guys will hurt each other and yourselves. Chen Xinan, who heard this, suddenly looked gloomy. Xin Haoyue remained stunned in her original spot. She couldn't say anything, even after a while. After the elderly man stared at their tightly linked hands, he shook his head and softly chuckled. When he was done, he turned around and staggered off. As Xin Haoyue stared at his fading figure, her heart suddenly felt heavy. She looked towards Chen Xinan and pretended to act casual. Do you think he's saying the truth? It was evident that Chen Xinan didn't want to stay here anymore. He held her hands and kept on walking forward. He replied to her in a cold voice, I don't believe in non-existent matters like this. Xin Haoyue chuckled and responded, yeah, I don't believe in it either. The two of them returned back in their hotel. As they weren't in the mood to stroll around anymore, they simply planned to go back the next day. What the two didn't know was that when the elderly man returned to his room, a young and tall man sat by the censer. And yet, the elderly man didn't even glance at the latter and just merely said, you can go back now. The young man laughed and played with his phone. However, he asked the old man with a sincere tone, didn't Mr. want me to tell them their fortune a few days ago? Why is it that when they just passed by, you were so eager to walk out? This elderly man is becoming older now and usually does whatever he wants. Please head back. Sorry to bother you, mister. The young man stood up and politely bowed. He shortly left the room afterwards. After he got in the car, he made a call. When the other line picked up, he softly laughed and then said, Wenying, do you have good intentions for worrying about the newlywed couple? Or bad intentions? Kaibian, stop speaking like that. Whether it's out of good or bad intentions, I'm just purely worried. To her response, Kaibian didn't really care that much. He replied, the both of them seem to be quite lovey-dovey. The girl has a nice figure and the guy is quite handsome. If you're not interested in Mo Bei because of him, I can kind of understand. After all, he's so much more handsome than Mo Bei. Upon hearing this, at the other end of the call, Sheng Wenyang tugged the corner of her lips silently. She didn't want to talk about this with him. She knew that the talented Kaibian held the same profession as her. After he graduated and returned to the country, he didn't engage in designing jewelry. But instead, he found a fascinating island and spent his time every day bathing in the sunlight, freely living with beautiful women. She had a deep relationship with him, and this was all thanks to Mo Bei, who was the middleman. This time, when she found out that Chen Xinan was going to stay a few days on the island, she suddenly remembered the mysterious elderly man. She had gone to see Kaibian in the past, and when he brought her over, he told her about the legend. Even though Sheng Wenyang held no superstitious beliefs regarding this, she was still quite curious at the moment and wanted to see if she was pleasing to the elderly man's eyes. After she went in to test it out, the elderly man faintly told her, please go back. The moment Sheng Wenyang heard this, she knew what he meant. She wanted to say something else, however. The elderly man quietly said, I am not interested in someone who I'm not fated to see. Just right then, Sheng Wenyang felt quite awkward. Kaibian, who was standing just 3 meters from her, was chuckling at the sight. Right now, what she cared about the most was what the elderly man said. Kaibian kept her in suspense. Do you know he told their fortune for them? Really? When Sheng Wenyang heard this, her heart thumped rapidly before sinking back. What did he say? Kaibian paused for a bit and carefully recalled. He then said, he said something like, go back to wherever you came from, otherwise you will hurt each other and yourselves. The reason why he knew this was because he was hiding by the door. It took him a lot of effort just to hear this. Wenyang, you know them, right? What does he mean by this? Yet, Sheng Wenyang was just murmuring the sentences before she went silent. Before she hung up, she hurriedly said, Kaibian, thank you. I'll treat you out next time. No problem. Sheng Wenyang was in a trance as she thought about the words. She said to herself, hurting one another and themselves, so they won't have a pleasant ending, just as she had said? Sheng Wenyang couldn't describe the feeling in her heart. As it turns out, destiny really exists. Heh. After Xin Haoyue returned to the hotel, while Chen Xinan was in the shower, she made an excuse up, saying that she left something by the beach and wanted to go back and look for it. Chen Xinan replied in the shower, after I'm done showering, I'll go with you. There's no need. It's not far from here anyway, and I'll be back soon. Xin Haoyue slipped out of the hotel and called a taxi, heading back to the Rebirth street. The sun had set, and the golden ray of light enveloped the silent road, making it seem more and more mysterious. Xin Haoyue stood in front of the sign that said, see through one's life, still hesitating. Since you're here, why don't you come in? A voice rang from inside the room, mixed with an arrogant tone. It seemed like he had been expecting her to come find him again. Xin Haoyue's face turned gloomy and walked in with a troubling heart. The decorations in the room were simple and adorned. Xin Haoyue took a look at the exquisite censer again, with white fogs rising up. Inside the room there was a faint and refreshing scent. It smelled good, but it also made one dizzy. Hello. Sit. The elderly man stared at her and indicated the wooden chair in front of him. Thank you. What do you want to ask? He flipped through the book in his hands. Xin Haoyue couldn't understand the diagrams and words on there at all. What do you know? This man knows a lot. Can this great master reveal everything then? Everything. It's against the natural law of things to even pry into people's lives. If I tell you everything, this man will probably suffer the wrath of heaven and die. This explanation, Xin Haoyue still didn't understand. If that's the case, why does the great master still insist on prying into people's lives? I find joy in battling fate. Ha ha ha! The elderly man suddenly laughed proudly. Xin Haoyue tugged the corner of her lips, speechless. I will only answer 2 questions. the elderly man suddenly said seriously. Xin Haoyue was stunned and she thought about it before asking, will the people in this world die? No, the elderly man suddenly laughed. Of all living things in the world, a human life is the most valuable. Xin Haoyue pondered and asked her question, will I die 2 years later? The elderly man glanced at her and said, life is death and death is life. Xin Haoyue became shocked and then her face paled. That elderly man gazed at her and suddenly sighed. There's a law for time and space, and everyone's lives are up to fate. Xin Haoyue's eyes became moist, but in the end she contained her composure. She stood up and placed all the cash she had brought on her on the table. She smiled at him and bid farewell. Great master, many thanks. Xin Haoyue walked out of the so-called see-through this life, dazed and an unwell expression. While she was in a trance, she suddenly looked up to see the slender figure leaning against the street lights in front of her. He wore blank pants and an army green jacket, his hair slightly wet. Xin Haoyue was unable to describe her complicated feelings right now. She had just found out that she would have to leave him one today, but the moment she stepped out of the door, she saw this man who had given her the so-called warmth and love. Chen Xinan. He looked up and started to walk towards her. After he linked their hands, he led the way back and asked, did you find out everything you wanted to know? Xin Haoyue tugged the corner of her lips and remained silent. Chen Xinan didn't look at her either, his gaze far in the distance. He suddenly said, I originally don't believe in fate, but your presence made me believe in it more or less. But I don't believe in it completely, because no matter what happens in the future, I believe that we will be together forever. Therefore, don't think too much about it. Xin Haoyue tugged a smile and replied, I wasn't thinking about anything. Chen Xinan looked at her incredulously. Your smile is ugly. If you don't want to smile, don't smile. Xin Haoyue's smile faded and she tightened their linked hands. She lowered her voice and said, if I suddenly leave one day, what will you do? Then, I will come and accompany you. What if you are unable to accompany me? Then, I will look over you forever. Okay, Chen Xinan, let's keep our words. Yes, so promise me that you won't overthink, okay? Xin Haoyue looked at him and smiled, walking shoulder to shoulder with their hands linked. But she only saw his slight smile in time, neglecting the slight flickering in his eyes. The short honeymoon ended, and the two arrived in Shenzhen City, staying in the Chen residence for most of the day. Xin Haoyue gifted the exquisite presents the two had chosen along their trip for each elder. Old man Chen was rocking on his rattan chair, and he smiled happily. Granddaughter-in-law, you're finally back. There's someone who can play chess with this old man now. Chen Xinan, who was elegantly pouring tea, said without raising his head, my wifey won't be playing chess with you. When old man Chen heard this, he grabbed the cane by his side and slammed it against Chen Xinan's slender legs. Although Chen Xinan's gaze was on the teacup, he quickly moved his legs and successfully dodged old man Chen's attack. Xin Haoyue, who stood behind Chen Xinan and was talking to Wang Yinlin, held her breath as she saw old man Chen waving his cane towards him. She was frightened that Chen Xinan might suffer a beating, but thankfully he seamlessly dodged it. She couldn't help but gasp and then say, Grandfather! Wang Yinlin stood across from her and naturally saw how frightened she was. She patted Xin Haoyue's hands and smiled, saying, you don't need to be nervous. Your grandfather and him have always been acting this way since Xinan was a child. For the majority of the times, unless Chen Xinan purposefully endured the beating, otherwise based on the old man's moves, how could he land a hit on Chen Xinan? When Chen Xinan heard this, he smiled at the old man Chen and said, I have a wife now, so take it easy. What Chen Xinan wanted to say was that he has a wife who loves him dearly. However, he was scared that he might provoke this lonely old man. Therefore, he changed his word choice in the end. Stop being proud. Plus, I wasn't asking for your opinion. I was asking for my granddaughter-in-law's. My opinion is her opinion. Old man Chen coldly humphed. You think we're in a feudal dynasty? Men being the head of the family has already been out of date. Chen Xinan didn't care about this. I have the final say no matter what. With Xin Haoyue's non-existent chess skills, she would probably be bullied for a few years by grandfather and still wouldn't stand a chance against him. He could bully her however he wanted to, but he would not allow for other people to do so. Chen Xinan finished pouring the tea and stood up, saying, Wifey, let's go over to father-in-law and mother-in-law's house while it's still early. Okay. Xin Haoyue nodded. She had prepared gifts for Chen family's elders, so she naturally prepared some for her family too. She already told Chen family's elders that she would be eating at the Xin family. Once Wang Yinlin heard this, she responded, Okay, quickly go. If you're going to stay there for dinner too, give us a call. Xin Haoyue nodded, and before she left, she smiled and said to old man Chen, Grandfather, when I have time, I'll come back and play chess with you. Old man Chen nodded in satisfaction. He looked at Chen Xinan and purposefully dragged his words. As expected, my granddaughter-in-law is more considerate. Wang Yinlin smiled and agreed. Father, I think so too. Chen Xinan didn't care and said to Xin Haoyue, Wifey, do you hear this? It's better if we have a daughter in the future. A cute daughter that looks like him? Xin Haoyue was touched by the thought. How could they control whether they give birth to a girl or boy? Instead, Xin Haoyue retorted, If I give birth to a boy, then... Chen Xinan believed that this was a very easy issue to resolve. If we get a boy, let's continue to try hard to get a girl. Chen Xinan believed that this was a very easy issue to resolve. If we get a boy, let's continue to try hard to get a girl. Heh, you think I'm a pig? Xin Haoyue finally understood. Chen Xinan won't stop until they get a daughter. After they came back, they rested for a day. Chen Xinan and Xin Haoyue already started slacking for about a month's worth of work. As the chairman of the company, Chen Xinan was quite unruly and comforted with leaving his work during the honeymoon period. He shut his laptop down, his work phone, and even his personal phone. He went as far as to buy a new phone, and the only contact he had in his phone was Xin Haoyue. It came down to the point where Mao Xuan had called them dozens of times because of an urgent matter, and he nearly decided to fly over after the call didn't go through. Assistant Wang, who couldn't get a hold of his boss, also felt helpless. His boss was the head of the company, so what could he do? He tried his best to handle the matters to the best of his abilities. Regarding the important documents and decisions, he had to wait for Chen Xinan to return to the company to handle it. Ever since Chen Xinan started working, besides taking a break for a few days during Chinese New Year, he never took a break longer than 10 days. Since he decided to take a whole month's break off, he'd been real busy after coming back. He finished handling the matters of the company in the day and had to spend the evening discussing about his own company with Mao Xuan. Although Chen Xinan's company touched upon many different fields, his main focus was on developing the real estate. Before his marriage, the company bought the most luxurious district within the center of Shengjin City, planning to build it into residential area and amusement city. After all, the land was vast enough to divide it into 2 sections. But lately, the project has just been launched, but none of the designs were to Mao Xuan's satisfaction. Mao Xuan knew that if he wasn't satisfied, it would be even harder for Chen Xinan, who mastered the area of architecture, to be pleased with the designs. As expected, he picked a few okay designs for Chen Xinan to see, and the latter's face turned gloomy. The design department should get new employees. Hearing his comment, Mao Xuan naturally responded, "Of course, I knew you definitely won't be pleased. Even I wasn't. Give it back and let them come up with another design overnight." Mao Xuan said, these designs were the products of them working overtime continuously. Chen Xinan picked a design up and glanced at it. If the design department can't come up with a satisfying design within 3 days, fire them all. Mao Xuan said, "You're cruel. You and I both know how much effort we poured into this project. If we casually accept any designs, anyone can be a part of the design department." Mao Xuan observed a moment of silence in tribute for the design department, and then he said, "I understand." Chen Xinan sighed and picked up a document from a side, making a side comment. How did they get into the design department with this level of achievement? Mao Xuan judged the matter as it stands. "You think everyone is on the same level as you?" Chen Xinan looked up and stared at him, before looking back down at his document, not wanting to explain to him. Mao Xuan suddenly suggested, "Nan, how about you personally take on this matter?" "What? Design one yourself. I remember how I praised you ceaselessly when I saw the design of your new house." "I don't feel like it." He didn't want to become rich because of his designs. His design was only for people who deserve it, like Xin Haoyue. He didn't want to become rich because of his designs. His design was only for people who deserve it, like Xin Haoyue. Hearing how he rejected bluntly, Mao Xuan said with regret, "I am certain that you won't be satisfied with anyone's designs, so why don't you accept my suggestion?" "I won't accept it." Chen Xinan stared at the document and said, "If you have any other important matters, quickly tell me. I need to rush home to accompany my wifey." Mao Xuan was speechless. He was about to explode. Did he need to be so ruthless and merciless? Don't you know that single people are afraid of dog food? Chen Xinan didn't care about, still returning home before 10 p.m. He noticed that the lights were on in the room, but the living room was quiet. He took off his suit jacket and returned to the bedroom, noticing that no one was there as well. After that, he went to the study and as expected, she was sitting in front of the laptop and quickly typing up the host's script. Chen Xinan stood by the door and his gaze landed on her red shoulder dress. Her white and smooth shoulders were exposed and under the charming red dress's contrast, it made her skin appear to be even more smooth and delicate. Chen Xinan's gaze landed down and he stared at her thighs. It was slender and thin, revealing her white long legs, making him interested. Because she was sitting, the dress only covered half of her thighs. The feeling of having a beautiful woman waiting for him at home wasn't that bad. Chen Xinan suddenly felt his mouth and tongue becoming dry. As he walked towards her, he tugged on his tie, unbuttoning a few of his buttons. The collar of his white shirt was opened wide, revealing his fine collarbone. When Xin Haoyue heard footsteps, she knew that it was him. Without looking back, she asked, "You're back?" I'm back." As Chen Xinan said this, he bent down and hugged her slender waist from behind. "Don't mess with me. I'm trying to finish my draft." The moment Chen Xinan hugged her, he buried his head on her shoulder and took in her faint and refreshing fragrance. First, the earlobes, and then he slowly moved down, sucking her neck. Xin Haoyue was worried that it may leave a mark on his neck, so she hurriedly stopped him. "I need to go on a show tomorrow." I know. Chen Xinan said this but carried her, sitting in her original spot. Meanwhile, he had her open her legs and sit on his thighs. Her dress wasn't even long in the first place, and after this, it was even more. Xin Haoyue didn't even have the courage to look down. She slightly glared at him and said, "Don't mess with me. I'm not done yet." "I'll hug you while you write your draft?" Xin Haoyue rolled her eyes. How could she remain calm enough to keep writing? "No, did you shower yet? You're going to wash for me? Go by yourself." Xin Haoyue wanted to push him away, but Chen Xinan held her back in his arms again. He lowered his head and kissed her chest, smiling, and he said, "This dress is pretty nice." A shoulder nightgown with a V-neck was not only sexy, but also very convenient to a certain something. For example, it took little to no effort to slide his hand up from the bottom of her dress. He could casually rub her breasts as he wished. Xin Haoyue slightly panted and slapped his shoulder, saying, "Softer?" "I can't." After he finished his words, Chen Xinan looked down and captured her lips, harshly ravaging her taste while hugging her to the bathroom. Xin Haoyue was speechless. He wanted to torment her, even while she's in the shower. He's quite annoying sometimes. After that, Chen Xinan embraced her while they were going to sleep. Xin Haoyue just finished showering, so she still remained energetic. She was in his arms and she wriggled around, her fingers slowly making its way to the collar of Chen Xinan's pajamas. While she was reminiscing the feeling of ecstasy, Chen Xinan suddenly opened her eyes and grabbed her mischievous hands. He asked, "Another round?" Xin Haoyue recalled their rounds in the bathroom, and her body sensitively trembled. She smiled and withdrew her hands, laying on him well-behaved. "I can't fall asleep." "Can't fall asleep? I have a way to make you tired. Want to try it?" Xin Haoyue stared at his gaze, harboring evil intentions, and immediately covered herself with the blankets. "I really have no strength. Don't mess with me. Plus, I need to wake up early tomorrow to write my draft." Chen Xinan was just scaring her anyway. Therefore, he followed along and said, "Quickly close your eyes and sleep." Xin Haoyue widened her watery eyes and suddenly smiled, saying, "Mao Xiyuan just called me." "What?" Xin Haoyue didn't hide this from him either, directly saying, "He told me that your company is planning to rebuild an amusement city as well as a residential area. But I heard that there is not a single design that you're satisfied with." "Then what? Are you trying to help him convince me?" Xin Haoyue smiled and hugged him. "I do want you to create your own design. In the past when I was in school, I heard that your designs were really unique and pleasing to the eyes. I only saw a few of yours, and still didn't get the chance to see a completed construction project of yours." Xin Haoyue said, feeling regretful. She reached over and shook his arms, acting cute. "How about it? Why don't you design one of your own? I want to take a look." Chen Xinan laughed and reminded, "Lady Chen, need me to remind you again that I personally designed our house?" "This is different," Xin Haoyue said. "You even kept this from me in the past. You dare to mention this now. Okay, fine. Let's go sleep." Chen Xinan finished saying this and pulled the blankets up, making sure it covered her completely. Xin Haoyue didn't think that he would actually agree, feeling a bit excited. "You really agreed?" Chen Xinan, who closed his eyes, hummed in agreement. "That's great. Then I want to see the design. After the construction is complete, you have to take me over as well." Chen Xinan chuckled and asked, "Would you be able to understand this?" "I don't care if I don't understand. I just want to take a look." Therefore, on the second day, Chen Xinan arrived at the company and sneered at Mao Xiyuan when he mentioned about the design again. "You're quite competent, knowing who to ask for help now." Mao Xiyuan was stunned momentarily and then understood. Xue didn't disappoint him. She mentioned it to him? He chuckled and explained, "I just didn't know what to do, so I had no choice but to ask sister-in-law. Therefore, Nan, please just agree to my suggestion." Chen Xinan tossed the annotated document he finished looking at in Mao Xiyuan's hands and said, "Hurry up. If you dare to ask Xue for help again regarding work, we'll settle old and new accounts together." Mao Xiyue chuckled and happily walked out of the office. With Chen Xinan, within 3 days, he could definitely hand over a refreshing piece of work. Regarding next time, whenever it was, he'd think about it when the time comes. What a pity that he couldn't use the resources to the best of his needs. Mao Xiyuan thought about this and wondered if he should invite Xin Haoyue out for lunch to thank her. Mao Xiyuan called and thanked her, explaining why he wanted to invite her out for lunch. Xin Haoyue directly said, "I'm quite busy recently. You can just owe me a meal, and we can eat out whenever I have time." Mao Xiyuan agreed quickly. "Sure." The morning after 3 days, Chen Xinan had already gone to work when Xin Haoyue woke up. She turned around to see papers by the bedside cabinet. She curious and grabbed it, becoming shocked after. It was an extremely detailed design of the different floors in the building, as well as its arrangements. Xin Haoyue looked at this for a while and took this to her heart. In the end, she couldn't help but faintly smile. Chen Xinan was indeed awesome. Since the project in Chen Xinan's company was launched, he became even busier, having less time to come pick her up after work now. Xin Haoyue didn't mind anyway. Instead, she felt that he was overly busy, so she decided to let him sleep for some extra time in the morning while she drove to work by herself. But she got into an accident this day, driving back home. While Xin Haoyue stopped her car to wait for the red light, the car in front of her suddenly backed a few steps for some unknown reason. Therefore, the cars gloriously bumped one another. Xin Haoyue didn't pay attention to the brand of car, but noticed that the paint on the car bumper was scratched. Xin Haoyue didn't even have time to check on her car when the person got out of their car and knocked on her car window fiercely. The moment she slid the car windows down, that person reached over and grabbed the collar of her shirt, yelling, "Do you know how to drive? How much are you going to pay for crashing into my new car?" Xin Haoyue had never been treated like this before, so her face turned gloomy and said sternly, "Let go. Believe me or not, but I'll call the police." Seeing her unfriendly expression and her harsh gaze, the person loosened their grip but said proudly, "My car just came out of the warehouse. It costs a few million, and you crashed into the car just like that. You better think carefully about how much you're going to pay me." Meeting this shameless person was enough. Xin Haoyue didn't even glance at him, raising the car window up and calling the police over to handle this matter. When the man saw her attitude, he smashed her car window angrily and said, "What's that attitude?" Xin Haoyue sat in the car and purposefully looked in front, keeping her gaze there. That man was infuriated and called someone over, kicking her car after that. He slammed the car window and cursed her fiercely and sinisterly. Xin Haoyue slid the car window down and coldly humphed. She said the truth. "Mister, do we need to get the security tape to see whose car crashed into the other one? You know very well who violated the rules. Regarding compensation, if you keep on causing a ruckus, you will definitely not get a single penny out of this." "Woman, who do you think you're scaring?" "I'm not scaring you. I'm just saying the truth. If you actually dare to touch me, believe me that in less than half an hour, you'll definitely become famous in Shenzhen City." That man was stunned. Xin Haoyue raised her head to look at him. Despite not saying anything, one could feel the imposing manner. There were many pedestrians forming a crowd, and a young girl recognized Xin Haoyue. She excitedly called out her name, "Xin Haoyue! Xin Haoyue!" That man stared at her clothes and appearance, thinking she was a celebrity. He said in disdain, "So what if you're a celebrity? You think that you don't need to pay for crashing my car? Mister, if you keep on making trouble without reason, I'll have my husband directly come over to handle this matter." "Call him. You think I'm scared of you?" Towards unreasonable people, Xin Haoyue felt like she was just wasting time. She directly called Chen Xinan and asked, "Are you busy?" Chen Xinan was in a meeting when she called. After picking up the call, he rarely let everyone in the meeting take 10 minutes break. He responded, "I'm not busy. What's the matter? Are you home?" Xin Haoyue felt helpless and said, "I met a scammer on my way home. He was the one who stopped his car, but he ended up driving backwards and crashing into my car. Right now he is trying to make me compensate him, and he has a very vile attitude." Chen Xinan hurriedly asked, "Where are you?" Xin Haoyue told him her address. Chen Xinan said, "I'm coming over immediately. Be careful and don't let him hurt you. Besides you, who else can bully me?" Xin Haoyue didn't think that man would touch her, besides the beginning when he pulled on her collar. She thought about it and remained angry. Why should she let him go so easily? Police officers came before Chen Xinan did. They enthusiastically said to Xin Haoyue, "Our bureau chief said that Lady Chen got into an accident here and wanted us to come over." Xin Haoyue thought about it and immediately understood that they were Chen Xinan's people, and therefore she pointed at her car and truthfully said, "Crashed." That person took a look and said, "Lady Chen, I was waiting for the red light, but he suddenly drove backwards and crashed into my car." "Oh, I understand. Lady Chen, then how much do you want the other party to pay?" "I just want him to apologize to me." "Stop dreaming." The man directly hollered and said, "Don't try to take advantage of me just because you know some people. Who was the one in my position just moments ago?" Xin Haoyue chuckled and said, "Didn't you say this car is worth a few million? I really don't see how this car is worth the value. Maybe it's because there's nothing special about the driver. You." That man was about to slap her, but Chen Xinan came on time and stopped him. "You, Chen Xinan?" The moment the man saw Chen Xinan's gloomy and dark face, he stopped being arrogant and rampant. He softened his tone and asked, "President Chen, why did you come here?" Chen Xinan glanced at him for a bit, before realizing who he was. It was Lai family's son who just returned to the country a while ago. Chen Xinan humphed and said, "I was wondering who was brazen enough to touch Chen family's people within Shenzhen City. As it turns out, it's Lai family." It seems like the warning he had given was ineffective. "Young Master Lai, this isn't abroad where you can be arrogant and do whatever you want. You crashed into my lady's car, so how do you want to pay? Please give me a clear answer." "I'll pay. I'll pay. President Chen, name me a price and I'll pay. Didn't you say your car is worth a few million? My lady's car is worth a bit more than yours. How about you pay us a few million?" Xin Haoyue secretly giggled. "Good job, Chen Xinan." President Chen. The man with surname Lai was in a difficult situation. "Young Master Lai can go back and think about it before telling me. If you can't make a decision, you can go back and ask President Lai how it feels to not be able to find a partner for his company." Once Chen Xinan was done speaking to him, he turned around and asked Xin Haoyue, "Are you hurt anywhere?" "I'm fine. Let's go home." It's better if I have someone bring you home next time. Xin Haoyue didn't want to make it inconvenient for him, so she said, it's just an accident today. Your husband, I can't tolerate the shock of you being in an accident every day. Xin Haoyue laughed and followed him, getting into his car. Regarding Xin Haoyue's car, Assistant Wang naturally helped drive it back. The colleagues from the police station gave young Master Lai a ticket and advised, it's rare to see someone who doesn't know how to respect and be polite to women. Pray for luck. Young Master Lai was infuriated, and once he got in his car, he called his sister. You spend so much money every day, yet you still can't win over Chen Xinan's heart. Father's blind for spending so much money on you to arrange a blind date between you and Chen Xinan. Miss Lai, who had been depressed over this matter for a while, couldn't help but tear up after her wounds were ripped apart again. She had finally remained calm after hearing the news of Chen Xinan being married, and this scolding made her retort, look at you. If you're powerful enough, why don't you go and fight him? Why do you guys always blame me? If Chen Xinan could easily be won over, why would all the young misses in Shenzhen City fail? No matter how much you guys force me to, I've given up. I won't be your pawn. Never. After yelling this, she immediately hung up. They all have issues. By the way, what did you mean by what you said to that man earlier? Unlike the stifled feeling that was wrapped around Chen Xinan's heart, Xin Haoyue appeared to be unaffected by neither the man nor the disconcerting crash that had just occurred. However, upon noticing Chen Xinan's silence and the lack of expression on his face, Xin Haoyue asked, are you angry? Chen Xinan looked at her. Are you not? I was, but not anymore. After you came and I watched him get beaten up, I realized that a person like him is not worth getting angry over, she confessed. His expression remained tense, so she added, to me, he is a nobody. In my world, he counts for even less than a random passerby. Who knows if I'll ever see him again? And even if I do, I wouldn't acknowledge him. Therefore, an irrelevant person like him is not worth getting angry over. Suddenly, Chen Xinan cracked a smile. I didn't know my wife was such a magnanimous person. For a moment she pondered over his words. It's not about how magnanimous I am. I just don't think we should let ourselves be affected by someone so insignificant. Think about it. He made you feel unhappy just now, which in turn made me worry. It's not worth it. Who is more important to you, him or me? After listening to what she said, Chen Xinan suddenly understood. While he was feeling angry at himself for not protecting her well, she was also taking great pains to placate his storming emotions. It was as though the one who had gotten implicated was not her, but someone else. It seemed like she would be calm even if the sky were falling, and as the thought crossed his mind, he was reminded of the past. Turning to her, he asked, when I first met you, I was very curious. The Xin Haoyue then didn't seem to care about anything. Nothing could faze you. But were you really as indifferent as you seemed? Xin Haoyue, on the other hand, couldn't remember a time when she was like that. Was I? She asked. Then before he could respond, I guess I was just too good at pretending. I was actually afraid of many things back then, but most of all, I was afraid of death. Eventually, I realized that aside from death, everything else was insignificant and unworthy of my attention. Probably because her obsession was too deep, so nothing else mattered. Then was I also insignificant and unworthy of your attention? Chen Xinan asked, narrowing his eyes slightly. The clever Xin Haoyue responded immediately as she thought, this is a trap. If I answer wrong, he'll definitely make me suffer tonight. So she said with a smile, haha, the past is the past. Let's not bring it up anymore. And with that, she quickly changed the subject. What? About being unable to find a partner company or something? She was keen. The Lai family offended you. More or less. And what is more or less supposed to mean? The fact that Miss Lai had successfully tricked him into entering her house was a matter of absolute humiliation. She had even managed to force a hug on him. He mustn't let his wife find out. Looking away, he replied lazily, the past is the past. Let's not bring it up anymore. This Sly. She stared at him. Something is fishy. He pretended he didn't hear her. When the two of them got home, Xin Haoyue remained suspicious of his evasive behavior. As she cooked dinner in the kitchen, she tried to recall the plot of the original story. Was there anyone who had the surname of Lai? After thinking about it for a while, she finally remembered. There was indeed a person like that in the original story, the young miss of the Lai family, Shi's cousin, and also a former marriage prospect of Chen Xinan. Hehe. When she finished cooking, she swept up the dishes and carried them into the dining room. As she laid the dishes down, she looked at Chen Xinan and harumphed. I've figured out how the Lai family offended you. Huh? Chen Xinan, who was just about to pick up his chopsticks, suddenly froze. He wondered why his wife was still on this topic. Chen Xinan, it's because you were involved with their beautiful young miss, isn't it? And if I remember correctly, you and Miss Lai were even going to be marriage partners. Smiling, Chen Xinan went to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. Wife, that was Mother's lousy idea, not me. Didn't I keep resisting until the end? Heh, but I doubt it was that simple. Something else must have happened between the two of you, something so bad that you had no choice but to attack them. Otherwise, why would you go as far as to making a move against their entire family? Am I right? Wife? Be good. Your wife is a little mad at you right now. Why did you have to go and provoke so many beauties? Wife, I am not in the mood, Chen Xinan. You're sleeping in the guest room tonight. Hey, wife. Eat your food. After dinner, Xin Haoyue waved her hand and sent Chen Xinan to wash the dishes. Eager to please, he immediately rolled up his sleeves and got to work. As he wiped away the grease from a bowl, he thought to himself, I need to find a way to coax my wife later. If it doesn't work, I can just pick her up and solve it in bed. Were there any problems that couldn't be solved in bed? None. Confident that he had come up with the perfect solution, Chen Xinan happily finished washing the rest of the dishes. Xin Haoyue, who was sitting in the living room eating fruit, glanced in the direction of the kitchen and smiled unkindly. When he came out of the kitchen, he saw his wife on the couch. Seemingly absorbed in a television show, it looked like she had no intention of talking to him. Wife, would you like to have some tea? I can brew it for you. No. What about fruit then? I can go wash some. She gestured to the fruit plate on the glass table. There is still plenty in there. Wife? The rest of what he wanted to say was abruptly interrupted by the ringing of his phone. Xin Haoyue glanced over and saw that the caller was Zhuangju. Chen Xinan picked up his phone and wondered while looking at her. What is this guy calling me for? She turned her gaze away and ignored him. The moment he picked up his phone and accepted the call, Chen Xinan found his ear bombarded by a jarring tumult of party music. It took him a few moments to figure out what Zhuangju was saying. If you're a real brother, come out here and drink with me. I'm with my wife. After getting married, Chen Xinan seldom went out to play around with his friends. Though he didn't go out much to begin with, one could still occasionally bump into him in a club or a bar. Now, it was nearly impossible to catch even a glimpse of his shadow. Zhuangju was in no mood to tolerate the dog food. Damn. What's so impressive about having a wife, huh? What do women count for anyway? Chen Xinan frowned. Zhuangju must be really drunk for him to speak like this. After thinking for a bit, he turned to Xin Haoyue and told her, I think something's happened to Zhuangju. I'll go check on him. Okay, she agreed immediately. Seeing that her previous attitude had softened a bit, Chen Xinan smiled and leaned over to press a kiss against her cheek. Wait for me to come back. Stay safe. Okay. Chen Xinan went to the bar Zhuangju was at and had to search for a while before finding him in a corner upstairs. As soon as he sat down, Zhuangju handed him a bottle. Have a drink. Then I won't be polite, Chen Xinan said, taking a small swig. He still had to coax his wife later. If he got drunk, he would really have to sleep in the guest room. Zhuangju saw the smile on his friend's face and instantly flared up again. Chen Xinan, isn't it just a marriage? What's so great about that? Would it kill you to not look so happy every day? Just seeing your face makes me mad. Oh, did I touch a nerve? You sure did. Great. Chen Xinan, karma will come back and bite you in your ass, you evil bastard. I already have a wife who loves me. Among all the rich men in this city, I bet you're the only one who can still be so delusional after marriage. Zhuangju sneered. You're not married, so what do you know? By now, Chen Xinan had figured out why his friend was in such a bad mood. So which woman is it this time? A college student? A famous model? Or a little girl from another family? Zhuangju snorted. You think I'm a pedophile like that, Mo Bei? If I'm remembering correctly, the Mo family arranged a 20-year-old girl for him, didn't they? You haven't seen her. They say she looks so innocent that she might as well be a little girl. All right, are we going to talk about you or Mo Bei? Zhuangju choked on his words. He took a swig of alcohol before continuing. When I was at your wedding, your wife's best friend caught my eye. That Zhong Qin girl. Oh, Chen Xinan said knowingly. What is that supposed to mean? He took a sip of alcohol and said bluntly, you should just give up already. Are you still a brother? As a brother, I'm advising you to turn around. Chen Xinan, my wife's best friend is not someone you can catch up to. Don't waste your energy. Would a real brother look down on me like this? Zhuangju raged. Didn't reality itself prove that you can't catch up? Chen Xinan pointed out ruthlessly. Otherwise, would you still be here drinking yourself stupid? That instantly shut him up. Right, he had been interested in Zhong Qin since they met at the wedding, yet even after a month of chasing her, she remained unmoved. He couldn't resist forcing a kiss on her tonight, which resulted in him getting a slap across the face. She even hurled a series of insults at him, telling him to stay the hell away from her. On the drive back, he also spewed an entire list of curses. Zhong Qin, just you wait. Chen Xinan accompanied him for a few more drinks. Before leaving, he patted him on the shoulder and advised him again to quickly give up. Later, when he arrived home, Chen Xinan made a beeline for the bedroom. However, the door was locked. He frowned and knocked on the door. Wife, I have something to tell you. You can tell me tomorrow. Are you sure you want to wait until tomorrow to hear about what's going on between Zhuangju and your best friend? He asked. Sure enough, not a second later, the door swung open. A flash of his triumphant smile was all she saw before he pinned her against the door, their lips clashing in a heated kiss. She reached out to smack him. Liar. I'm not lying. Zhuangju chased after your best friend Zhong Qin for an entire month and failed. When did this happen? After the wedding. Then Zhuangju? He's just drinking right now. Don't worry about him, he said, kissing her again. While the two of them were rolling together in bed, Chen Xinan thought complacently to himself, I will never sleep in the guest room. While she was on her way to work the next day, Xin Haoyue sent Zhang Qin a message, asking about the unexpected development between her and Zhuang Zhu. Zhang Qin was in the middle of rushing to work, so her response was a simple, I'll explain later when I'm free. Thus, the two arranged to meet for dinner in the evening. When Chen Xinan called her and said that he was going to pick her up after work, she told him to figure out dinner on her own because she had an appointment in the evening. A dinner appointment? He sounded unhappy. Yes, I'm going with Zhang Qin. Immediately, Chen Xinan understood the reason for their dinner appointment. For a moment, he regretted being a busybody the night before. He'd shot himself in the shot. When will you be home? It'll depend. This was the worst type of answer. Chen Xinan replied, Then I'll pick you up at 8:30 after I finish working overtime tonight. How come I didn't know that you were working overtime today? She asked dubiously. How can I be home when my wife isn't? Do you want to force me to guard an empty house? He grumbled. This made Xin Haoyue happy. Then how come I've never heard you complaining about guarding an empty house before we got married? Are the days before marriage even worth being compared to the days after? That's true, she agreed with a smile. After the call ended, Chen Xinan called for Assistant Wang. The latter rushed into the office only to learn that his boss wanted him to inform every department head that they had to work overtime tonight. Furthermore, their quarterly conference would also be held in advance. Assistant Wang silently gauged Chen Xinan's expression. Though his face wasn't particularly happy, it didn't look like he was in a bad mood either. It didn't seem like he had fought with the lady boss. Nonetheless, Assistant Wang still double-checked his boss's expression before answering, Yes, President Chen. As he closed the office door, he silently lit a candy for each of the department heads. At this rate, he was certain they would become too busy to even eat dinner. When Xin Haoyue saw Zhang Qin at their meeting place, Zhang Qin was absent-mindedly stirring her coffee with a spoon. What happened to you? Zhang Qin immediately recognized her friend's voice and turned around, her expression somewhat dark. Let's not talk about that. I couldn't fall asleep until 3 o'clock last night, then I was almost late to work in the morning. I've been feeling out of sorts all day. Xin Haoyue looked at her and saw that indeed she looked exhausted. Because of Zhuang Zhu? She asked probingly. More or less, I guess. So what are your thoughts on him? Xin Haoyue asked. What can I think? It's impossible, came the unhesitant response. You're that certain? We're not compatible. Drawing upon her understanding of Zhuang Zhu, Xin Haoyue responded, Though he is a bit muddle-headed, the main reason is because he hasn't met the right person for him. Who knows, maybe all of his bad habits will change once he finds them. Zhang Qin's expression remained indifferent, so she added, Lust and infidelity are common flaws of men. Lifting an eyebrow, Zhang Qin smiled and asked, I've never thought of myself as a particularly charming person. Besides, how come your Chen Xinan doesn't share this common flaw? At the mention of Chen Xinan, Xin Haoyue couldn't help but smile and refute. He's a different kind. Zhang Qin sighed. To be honest, even without you saying it, I know that men can change after they've met the right person. But it's impossible for Zhuang Zhu and I. You said it's okay to just fall in love and get married, but that's not suitable for me. My parents are both humble public officials, and our family background is average. Zhuang Zhu is a rich second generation. The moment my parents learn about his family background, they will try to stop me from seeing him again. Last time I saw them, my cousin had gotten divorced within 3 months of marrying a rich man. They reminded me that it's always better to marry within one's own social class. After listening to her friend's thoughts, Xin Haoyue fell silent. Indeed, love was a matter between two people, but marriage was a matter between two families. Then, Zhang Qin added one of her own concerns. Besides, I'm not even interested in dating someone, let alone marrying them. It's fine if I can still retreat afterward, but if I really end up pouring my heart into a relationship that fails, I can't afford to start a whole new relationship. I don't have that luxury. But don't you think it'll be too late to talk about love when you find a man who meets all of the right conditions? Moreover, finding one like that will be hard. It's whatever, I'll go with the tide. She never thought much about love anyway. Xin Haoyue really couldn't continue trying to persuade her friend, so she just said, You should think over it again. Haha, there's no need to rethink it. Why should I waste my time on it? Zhuang Zhu's interest in me is only temporary anyway. He'll forget about me once another woman catches his eye. I don't need to worry about it. Xin Haoyue looked at her and remarked bluntly, But why do I feel like you're upset? Something flickered in Zhang Qin's eyes before she rigidly changed the topic. Let's not talk about him anymore. Let me interview Mrs. Chen, who has been promoted to a married woman instead. How is life after marriage? Pretty good. She responded with a laugh. Tut-tut, how envious. Don't envy me. You'll be the same sooner or later, and who knows, maybe you'll be even happier than me. That's true. Zhang Qin smiled, and afterward, the two moved on to other topics. It was 10 p.m. when they finished chatting, eating, and shopping. They walked out of the shopping mall with several bags in hand. When Zhang Qin asked her where she'd parked her car, Xin Haoyue responded, I encountered a little accident while driving home yesterday, So Chen Xinan drove me today. My car isn't here. Envious, Zheng Qin said. Then how about I drive you back today, Mrs. Chen? They lived in opposite directions, so if she took up Zheng Qin's offer, it would be midnight before Zheng Qin herself got home. No, that would be too much trouble for you. I'll call Chen Xinan to pick me up. You're done? As soon as her words fell, she heard a low voice coming from behind her. It is a naturally familiar voice. She turned around and said, "Why are you here?" Chen Xinan, who was only 2 steps away from her, bent down slightly to take the bags from her hands. "I've been waiting for you for a long time." He'd called her after his meeting, but she didn't answer. He assumed she didn't notice, so he called Zhuangju and asked him where Zheng Qin was. When they were talking last night, he remembered Zhuangju saying that he would go to Zheng Qin's company entrance every day after work to see her. As expected, Zhuangju immediately gave an address. When the two of them met up, they saw the girls strolling through the mall. Instead of disturbing them, they went upstairs and enjoyed a leisurely meal together. Of course, only Chen Xinan was completely at leisure. Zhuangju was still recovering from his emotional injury. They only showed up when they saw that the girls were getting ready to leave. Zheng Qin was just about to tease the Chen couple when she suddenly noticed Zhuangju standing behind Chen Xinan. He was wearing a black short-sleeved shirt, and his eyes were shining as he looked at her. She thought it was a terrible feeling, so she hurriedly said to Xin Haoyue, "Haoyue, since you have someone to take you home, I'll be leaving first." All right, Xin Haoyue understood. However, unfortunately for Zheng Qin, Zhuangju immediately went after her. Xin Haoyue couldn't help but call his name. "Zhuangju." The man looked back and shouted in a hurry, "Sister-in-law, I'll invite you to dinner next time." "Why are you inviting me to dinner for no reason? We should let them figure this out on their own. Let's not interfere anymore." She understood that, but "I'm just a little worried. If love was completely smooth sailing, then you should be worried." What Mr. Chen said makes sense." She smiled as she looked at him. Chen Xinan didn't say any more. In September, when school began again for students, Dean Zhao called Chen Xinan and invited him to give an inspirational speech to the new students. He immediately declined. As a result, Dean Zhao called Xin Haoyue the next day, hoping she could help persuade Chen Xinan. Though Chen Xinan had graduated a few years ago, he was still an undefeated legend in the school. Xin Haoyue suddenly remembered the matter of the design drawing. "Dean, don't tell me if it was Mo Shiyuan who gave you this time?" Dean Zhao brushed it off with a laugh and didn't respond. When Xin Haoyue brought it up to Chen Xinan that night, she felt a little complicated. "They sure know how to use their resources. Since they couldn't convince you directly, they called me instead. Is my face that easy to use?" Chen Xinan held her in his arms and pressed a smile against her forehead. "Is it? How about you try and see?" he incited. Her happy eyes filled with triumph. "Fortunately, we're not in the ancient times. If you were a king in the ancient times, you would be a king who was misled by a beauty." "Oh, so beauty, are you going to seduce me?" "I can consider it." Xin Haoyue laughed and turned her body, pressing herself on him. Then, just as he had done before, she leaned down and engaged their lips and tongues in a passionate dance. At the end of September, Chen Xinan returned to the school as promised. Countless students swarmed the lecture hall. Chen Xinan was wearing a black suit. It had been carefully chosen by Xin Haoyue as a way of apology. His outfit, paired with his noble and dignified temperament, was enough to win over all of the females in the lecture hall. Their screams filled the hall in droves. Then he began his speech. It wasn't in his personality to encourage them to always work hard and put in their best effort. Instead, he just lifted a few of his own experiences and warned them about the cruelty of society. If one does not become strong, then they will no choice but to let themselves be trampled on by others. There would be no use complaining. They would simply be reaping what they sowed. His whole speech could be summed up in one sentence by one of the girls in the audience: "Poisonous chicken soup." That girl asked, "Senior Chen, this chicken soup is so poisonous. Can you not be so cruel? Give us a better recipe instead." He chuckled. "Society will never consider your feelings because to it, you are a nobody." The girl's face turned red. "Really? So poisonous?" In an act of defiance, she asked him, "Senior Chen, I heard that you're married? You speak so bluntly. How does your partner tolerate it?" "Usually, I indulge her." Wow, the students were in an uproar. This is a blatant display of love. "Senior Chen, can your wife get together? Can you share some tips on how to chase someone?" Chen Xinan looked at the boy who'd asked the question and was momentarily stupefied. He felt a little embarrassed, but thought about it and good-naturedly responded, "2 conditions. You have to be shameless enough, and you have to be patient enough." "Wow," the boy continued. "Then, Mr. Chen, did you chase after your wife first?" Chen Xinan answered honestly, "Yes. To be honest, she was the one who persuaded me to give a speech here today. She wanted me to come, so I came. My wife said that because we didn't spend much time together in college, she has always wished that one day I would stand on the stage while she sat with the audience, laughing and listening to me talk." The students couldn't stand it. Not only was his business successful, but even his marriage was so sweet. It was really infuriating. But unfortunately, she is busy with work and couldn't come together. Now, I will end this here. The students were clearly reluctant to give up on such a good opportunity, but unfortunately, Assistant Wang had already escorted his boss out. The restless students were soon pacified by the teachers. Once Chen Xinan left, he was about to call Xin Haoyue when he heard a clear female voice from behind him. Anan! He frowned and turned around. Sheng Wenyang, dressed in a white shirt and black dress pants, was walking towards him. Before he could speak, she tucked her hair behind her ear and said with a small smile, "What a coincidence. I didn't expect you to come today." Chen Xinan looked away from her and asked mildly, "Do you need something?" She paused before squeezing out another small smile. "No. I have something to do, so I'll be leaving first." He had no intention of chatting with her. Sheng Wenyang took a step forward, then changed her mind. She stepped back again and silently watched his departing back, before giving a light laugh and leaving in the opposite direction. When Assistant Wang saw her leave, he let out a relieved sigh. Beside him, Chen Xinan naturally noticed his exaggerated move. "What do you mean by that sigh?" he asked. The assistant immediately straightened his back and replied stiffly, "Nothing, President Chen." Chen Xinan gave him a meaningful look, as Assistant Wang resisted the urge to wipe his forehead. He was just afraid his boss might be influenced by others and want to commit infidelity. Fortunately, their interaction was cold. Naturally, Chen Xinan did not take his encounter with Sheng Wenyang to heart. However, little did he know that for the next few days after his visit, the college forums were filled with posts about him. They all talked about his talent and achievements and his valiant background. Of course, others were more interested in his private life. Several people dug into his love history, and some even managed to find pictures of Chen Xinan and Xin Haoyue from their magnificent wedding. They lamented the man's success in life. Of course, there were also people who brought up Sheng Wenyang, saying that Xin Haoyue stole Chen Xinan by force. They called her a homewrecker who took advantage of Sheng Wenyang's absence from going abroad. Everyone sighed. Naturally, the parties involved did not know that they had become a topic of gossip. Zhongqin's cousin, who happened to be a freshman in the same college, saw Chen Xinan that day, called her to gush about his looks and elegance. Zhongqin responded with some perfunctory comments. Unexpectedly, 2 days later she received another call from her cousin. She said, "Cousin, that best friend of yours, did she interfere with Chen Xinan and Sheng Wenyang's relationships to become Mrs. Chen?" When Zhongqin heard this, her face immediately darkened. "Where did you hear that?" "That's nonsense. Don't talk irresponsibly." Having been so suddenly and harshly reprimanded by her older cousin, the girl was momentarily stunned. "Someone in the school forum said that, so I just... Are you that free? Don't pay attention to that gossip and focus on studying." After she hung up the phone, Zhongqin decided to call Xin Haoyue and tell her about what had just happened. It was National Day, so Xin Haoyue and Chen Xinan were visiting the old Chen Manor. "It's okay, it's just a thing of the past." "It doesn't matter anymore," she responded after hearing what Zhongqin said. I know, I just wanted to make sure you were aware." "Don't worry, I know what to do." Right as the call ended, Chen Xinan came out of the shower. Noticing her somewhat stern expression, he asked, "What happened?" "Nothing." She saw that his bathrobe was mostly open. Laughing, she wrapped her arms around his waist and said, "Just now, my mother called to ask about a child." "Huh?" She asked what our thoughts are on it. The two had been married for nearly half a year already, yet there was still no news of pregnancy. He thought about it for a while before responding, "I haven't enjoyed enough of our two-people world yet. I'm not ready for a little devil to come and take you away from me." "Is that the only reason?" She looked up at his face with a smile. "What else could it be?" She stopped and carefully observed his expression before hesitantly voicing her thoughts. "Are you still worried about what she told me?" "Huh?" She let go and stood up. As she looked at his face, she said solemnly, "If more time passes and I am still unable to give you a child, I'll feel very bad. If you're not ready to have a little bun in our lives yet, we can wait a little later. However, I do wish we could have a child by the end of next year. The child would look like you. That would be so cute." Chen Xinan bent over and picked her up. He sighed a little and whispered in her ear, "Why do you want the child to look like me? I want them to look like you. Because in the end, if I am unable to make you stay, at least I will have a child who looks like you," he thought. "I want to have a girl who looks like you." Xin Haoyue laughed. "But I want to have a boy." "Then we can have a boy first, then try for a girl who looks like you." She nodded. "Okay." He lowered his head and kissed her crown. She looked up and wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down for a kiss. Provoked by her initiative, Chen Xinan pressed her against a dresser, and after 2 rounds of tossing, he laid her on the bed and continued with another difficult position. Xin Haoyue couldn't keep up with him. She panted and begged him to let her rest, but it only excited him even more. Finally, only after she was thoroughly exhausted was he satisfied. After that, she lied in bed gasping. Chen Xinan wasn't done yet. He used a towel to clean her up before hugging her to him, his large hands gliding mischievously across her bare skin. She felt weak all over and harshly slapped away his hands. Then, she suddenly remembered that while they were tossing earlier, didn't she accidentally lose control and make too much noise? She'd forgotten that they were still in the old Chen Manor. Earlier, did my voice What? Chen Xinan stared at her pale, flushed cheeks and couldn't help but kiss her again. Don't messing around, she panicked. How good is the soundproofing in your room? Not very good, he replied intentionally. Crap, it's going to be so awkward tomorrow. Chen Xinan disagreed. Don't they want grandchildren? They should be happy to hear it. The rims of her eyes began to redden, so he decided to stop messing with her. I'm kidding. The soundproofing in my room is one of the best. Even if you cry your throat out, no one will hear you, so next time, you can be as loud as you want. Can't you be more serious? Xin Haoyue and Chen Xinan stayed with the Xin family for 2 days. Recently, Bai Ning picked up an interest in plants and loved to spend time in the garden. Xin Haoyue stood beside her, helping her trim and water the flowers every so often. When Bai Ning saw how well she was cooperating, she laughed and remarked, not bad. Smiling back, Xin Haoyue replied, Grandpa also enjoys this kind of pastime when he's bored. Whenever I go to the Chen Manor, he would ask me to help him. After growing old, these sudden interests just keep coming to me. I'm sure it's because your mentality is good. She had always thought that people who liked to take care of plants were people with excellent mentality. However, Bai Ning looked at the flowers and sighed again. The October wind in Shenzhen City carried with it a slight chilliness. When a breeze brushed against her face, Xin Haoyue felt not only its refreshing coolness, but also the implicit emotion from Bai Ning's sigh. Mom, what's wrong? Bai Ning hesitated before asking, Is there still no news? Mom, Xin Haoyue said helplessly. It hasn't even been a year since Chen Xinan and I got married. Can't you be more patient? I can wait, but can the Chen family? You and Grandpa have been pretty good about it. You've both only asked twice. We don't want to pressure you. Then don't, Mom. The matter of a child, we should just let it happen naturally. Plus, Chen Xinan also said that he doesn't want to have a child so early on in our marriage. You've discussed it with him already? After seeing Xin Haoyue nodded in response, Bai Ning said, That's good then. The corners of Xin Haoyue's lips curved upwards. Mom, you don't need to worry about me. Chen Xinan and I are very close. If you want to worry about someone, you should worry about my brother. Your brother? Just thinking about him makes me mad. Oh, that piqued Xin Haoyue's interest. Mom, tell me about it. What is there to say? He's turned down every girl I've introduced him to, no matter what her personality or appearance is like. When I asked him what type of girl he wants, do you know how he responded? One that catches my eye, he said. There are so many girls for him to pick from, yet none of them caught his eye. It really infuriates me. That's it? Xin Haoyue smiled. Mom, hasn't brother always been like that? There's nothing to be mad about. How about I go talk to him tonight? What do you say? Maybe he's rejecting all those girls because he already has someone in his heart. Bai Ning had never considered that possibility. He told you that? No, it's just my guess. If he already has someone in his heart, then that's fine. I'm just afraid she paused. Never mind, maybe I'm thinking too much. All right, make sure to thoroughly question him tonight. Yes, ma'am. For the rest of the afternoon, Xin Haoyue pondered over how to complete the great task she had been assigned. Chen Xinan accompanied her in her room, staving off boredom by looking through her stuff. He opened a photo album and looked at a picture of her from middle school. How ugly, he teased. Xin Haoyue was sitting on the bed as she brainstormed. When she heard him, she snatched the album from his hands and feigned anger. Don't look then. He didn't try to take it back. Instead, he lowered his head and whispered lowly, She's not you anyway. Then, he turned his attention to a notebook. Xin Haoyue put a hand against her chest and thought that her heart felt a little tight. Chen Xinan sat down in a chair, his long legs stretched out before him as he lazily flipped through the pages. The characters in the notebook were so ugly that he couldn't help saying, Fortunately, your penmanship isn't this ugly. Xin Haoyue was unwilling to give in. Indeed, her calligraphy could be called beautiful at best. His was bold yet exquisite and imbued with his individual aura of pride. Yes, President Chen, this lowly one cannot be compared to you, so could you spare this lowly one of your attacks? She fawned. He gave her a deep look and she stared back, confused. I thought I could learn more about you if I looked through the things in this room, but I guess not. He stood up and approached her. Tell me about yourself? For a moment, she was stunned. Then she asked, What do you want to know? This was the first time he was bringing up the subject so bluntly. In the beginning, when he found out that she wasn't the original Xin Haoyue, he never asked about it directly. Even the members of the Xin family knew that she was a different person, but they had all silently accepted it and didn't question her origins. She didn't understand. Why are you asking this today? Were you not curious before? I was, he admitted. I had people investigate, but no results came out of it. Later, I thought that maybe the phenomenons of time and space crossing actually exist, however absurd they sound. Xin Haoyue lifted the corners of her lips. I guess so. Well, I don't think there's much to say. I wasn't raised in a happy family. You could say I grew up watching and listening to my parents argue, and sometimes my father would even hit my mother. She stayed with him for my sake, but in the end, she was unable to bear it. They divorced after I took my college entrance exam. As he listened, his expression changed a little. He sat down beside her and took her into his arms. She struggled to recall those familiar, yet forgotten memories. The financial situation of my family wasn't the best. My father liked to eat, drink, and fool around outside. Sometimes it would get so bad that not even the life and death of my mother and I mattered to him. Due to this, I genuinely cherished my opportunity to attend school. I studied hard, and when I got into college, I balanced several part-time jobs to make a living. As she said this, she laughed. If you met me in that world, I doubt you would have paid any attention to me. I had no background, no ability, and no money. You have so little confidence in yourself? No, I just understand your arrogance too well. He decided to change the topic. So when you were there, did you get into any relationships? She mulled over it before responding in a serious manner. I was actually chased by quite a few people. In my second year of high school, there was a handsome classmate who liked me for several years. He finally confessed to me after our college entrance exams, but I had just received the news of my parents' divorce. Naturally, I wasn't in the mood to respond. He tried to contact me for several months afterwards, but I ignored him, and he eventually stopped. Haha. In college, there were also a few seniors who liked me. However, I was too busy to think about dating. My mind was just S10 stuffed with thoughts about money. Chen Xinan remarked. Fortunately, you were too busy. Otherwise, after comparing them to me, you would have realized how poor your vision was back then. Hey, Chen Xinan. He clasped her left hand and rubbed the ring on her finger. Don't worry, the bad things have passed. She nodded. I know. It's just, I still think about my mother a lot. I wonder how she's doing now. Her health isn't good, so she can't work on her own. How is she living right now? And what about her original self? Did she die? Was she cremated? Her mother must have been very sad. Chen Xinan didn't know how to comfort her, so he said, Don't worry, I'm sure she's just as strong as you. I think so too. During dinner, Xin Haoyue saw Xin Qiancheng. Afterwards, when he went back to his study to make a call, she took advantage of the opportunity to follow him in. He spent nearly 20 minutes talking on the phone before hanging up. Upon seeing his sister reading a book while patiently waiting for him, he was easily able to guess the reason for her visit. Mom and Dad sent you here to spy? Xin Xinan laughed. So, brother, what do you think? He responded with one generous word, fate. But if you don't even pay attention to the opposite sex, how will you know if you've met your fated person? Fate will find a way. If I don't take the initiative, then she will. So, you like girls who take the initiative? Xin Qiancheng took a stack of papers from the desk and smacked her on the head with it. You should focus on your own happy life. Don't worry about my marriage matters. How can I not? Brother, could it be that you already have someone on your mind, but she doesn't like you, so you didn't want to tell us? I think you've been together with Chen Xinan for too long. You're so idle that the hole in your brain has grown bigger. Brother, shut up. Just let things play out on their own, and you should tell Mom to stop worrying too. Then you should find a girlfriend to soothe her worries. If you keep talking, I'll call Chen Xinan to take you back. She shot him a contemptuous glare. Humph, you deserve to be single. After Chen Xinan finished showering, he saw Xin Haoyue return. She was clearly in a sulky mood. You went to look for trouble? He asked. I was sent by my mom. Mom is just worrying too much. I actually feel very sorry for Xin Qiancheng. He's just like me in the past. Tut-tut, as if that's true. Isn't it? He couldn't understand why the older generation was so obsessed with forcing marriages on the younger generation. The Xin family was like that, the Chen family was like that, and the Mo family was too. Heh. So, President Chen, you should thank me for taking you in from the sea of miserable blind dates. Otherwise, you might really be like my brother right now. I am very grateful, he agreed. Ah, Chen Xinan picked her up and threw her on the soft bed. He had her pinned under his body before she could even react. Still, I prefer to express my gratitude with actions, rather than words. Hey. The days passed smoothly. Once the national holiday ended, Xin Haoyue and Chen Xinan returned to their busy work lives. The company was starting a new project, so Chen Xinan was scheduled for a business trip in early November. He told Xin Haoyue about the trip while they were lying together in bed. She was very sleepy by then and only asked a single question. When will you be back? I'm not sure. Half a month at least, and 1 full month at most. Oh. She acknowledged faintly as her eyelashes quivered, and her eyelids closed shut. A moment later, she fell asleep. Chen Xinan, who was just about to ask if she wanted to go with him, stared at her sleeping face with a helpless yet indulging expression. He pulled her closer and scolded in a low voice. You heartless little thing. Then, he closed his eyes and joined her in slumber. When Xin Haoyue woke up the next morning, she thought for a long moment before remembering. Did you say something to me last night? Chen Xinan looked at her and quirked an eyebrow. Mrs. Chen, your husband is going on a business trip. What do you think? When are you leaving? She asked after some contemplation. This afternoon. Oh, that's it? Evidently, he had been expecting more. As he narrowed his eyes, a dangerous aura surrounded his body. Smiling, Xin Haoyue walked over to him and sat down on his lap. She leaned in and planted a kiss on his lips. Have a safe journey, and come back soon. Chen Xinan raised his head slightly. He reached for her waist and pulled her in, seizing her lips. He bit and sucked on them until his mood improved a little, and only then did he finally let her go. Instead of being mad, however, she was cheerfully smiling. Ever since they got married, they had not been apart from each other for such a long duration of time. Chen Xinan felt an inexplicable feeling of gloominess, but when the afternoon arrived, he had no choice but to board the plane. Nonetheless, he made sure to call her right before and after the flight. Good boy, was her laughing response. An indescribable expression appeared on Chen Xinan's face, then he shook his head and smiled slightly. If their child ended up being a mischievous one, then it would be obvious which parent they took after. Assistant Wang, who was accompanying him and had been caught in a storm the entire day, silently rejoiced when he saw his boss's expression lighten up. As expected, the lady boss was always the best at calming down the boss. The long duration of Chen Xinan's business trip allowed Xin Haoyue to regain the freedom and carefreeness she had lost after marriage. She planned her time very thoroughly. Visit the Chen family for a few days, accompany her own parents for a few days, then invite Zhongqin out to have fun for the last few days. The two friends met up to have dinner after work. Then, they went to watch the latest detective movie starring Zhongqin's favorite male actor. He was pale with a small, handsome face. In other words, he was a pretty boy. When the movie ended, Zhongqin was still gushing over the actor's looks and acting skills. How come I couldn't see it? Xin Haoyue asked ruthlessly. Zhongqin refused to talk to her for 3 seconds. Xin Haoyue didn't care. If you want to break off our relations, then do it. She turned around to search for a garbage can, and happened to see Zhuangzhu frowning in their direction from a short distance away. Quickly, her gaze skipped from Zhuangzhu to the scantily dressed and heavily dolled-up woman standing beside him. Xin Haoyue's gaze darkened slightly. However, before she could express her disapproval, she received a provocative look from the woman. The woman deliberately moved closer to Zhuangzhu, causing Xin Haoyue to frown. When the man looked to her for help, she ignored him. What are you harumphing about? Zhongqin asked in confusion. Nothing. Xin Haoyue was just about to pull her friend away, but she was already looking in Zhuangzhu's direction. Xin Haoyue tugged on her hand. Let's go. Zhongqin agreed with what seemed like a half self-mocking and half disdainful smile. After leaving the movie theater, Xin Haoyue looked up at the night sky. The vast sky was squeezed into 4 dark corners by the towering building above them. The stars and the bright moon were nowhere in sight. As Zhongqin remained silent, Xin Haoyue blurted, "Why don't we go back and beat them up to help you vent? Zhuangzhu and that woman too. If anything happens, I'll get Chen Xinan to clean it up." Pfft, Zhongqin laughed. You really seem like a tyrant now. Aren't I doing it for my best friend? Sighing, Zhongqin declined. Forget it. It has nothing to do with me. Xin Haoyue didn't believe her. Really? No taste. Xin Haoyue couldn't tell if that was directed at the man or the woman. After a moment, she said, "You should just ignore scum like him." Approaching from 2 steps behind them was Zhuangzhu, who suddenly halted as though he had been shot in the heart by an arrow. Sister-in-law, please don't make it worse, will you? Xin Haoyue turned her head and gave him a lazy, "Yeah." The woman standing beside him was surprised by his address. She looked at Xin Haoyue and promptly changed her expression. Sister-in-law, what a coincidence. Ha, who are you calling your sister-in-law? Xin Haoyue gave Zhuangzhu a look. Don't go around telling people they can call me whatever they want, Zhuangzhu. I don't like it when strangers do that. Then, without acknowledging the woman at all, she looked at Zhongqin and said, Let's go. Of course, what is there to save for? Zhongqin took Xin Haoyue's arm and the two walked away, smiling. As Zhuangzhu stared after Zhongqin's departing figure and prepared to chase after her, he was stopped by the woman beside him. The pungent smell of her perfume overwhelmed his senses. Babe, is that woman really your sister-in-law? Why were her words so tactless? Did you hear what she said to me earlier? Shut up, you get out of my sight, babe, scram. Zhongqin and Xin Haoyue were still only a short distance away, so naturally they heard him. The latter raised an eyebrow as she observed at her expressionless best friend. Love is a strategic war of pain. Pain? More like jealousy, Zhongqin replied contemptuously. True, using another woman to try to make you jealous? Only a man like Zhuangzhu would use such a lousy trick. Zhongqin gave an ambiguous reply, to which Xin Haoyue responded with a meaningful look. I can definitely feel a spark between them. As she laughed to herself, she couldn't wait to get home and gossip about the day's events to Chen Xinan. When she neared their house, however, she spotted a black car parked near the gates. The car's window was down, revealing Zhuangzhu with a deeply melancholic expression as he smoked a cigarette. She drove her car by him and deliberately stopped to ask, President Zhuang, are you here to help us guard our gates for free? The moment he heard her voice, Zhuangzhu withdrew his melancholic expression and replaced it with his usual cynical smile. Sister-in-law, if you need me to, I would be more than happy to do it. Just say the word. Xin Haoyue didn't feel like beating around the bush with him. If you have something to say, just say it. Sister-in-law, please show mercy and lend me some help. Help with what? She asked, though she knew exactly what he was talking about. You know what, sister-in-law, I'm chasing Zhongqin. But I don't know. Didn't I just see you together with another woman? You seem to be pretty close with her, or am I wrong? I was wrong, but it wasn't my idea, sister-in-law. I'm not going to help you. If you have the ability, chase her on your own. Then could you try not to make the situation worse than it already is? He didn't want to have to overcome her as an obstacle. Okay, I won't. Xin Haoyue laughed. Your past reputation is terrible, and you're still pretty bad now. I don't trust you with Zhang Qin. Then she added, don't talk to me again until you've corrected your ways. Sister-in-law, that's not. All right, President Zhuang, my husband is away today, so I won't invite you in for tea. Please have a safe trip back, goodbye. Zhuangju stared after her with a stomach of words he couldn't let out. As he started up his car engine, he couldn't help but curse. Why the hell is it so hard to chase a single woman? If things continued like this, he would have no choice but to listen to the advice of his notorious buddies. Force what shouldn't be forced, and just cook the rice. Chen Xinan happened to call right after Xin Haoyue finished cleaning up the house. When he asked her about her day, she excitedly recounted everything to him. I think there's definitely a spark between them, but the road ahead is rough. Zhuangju sucks at chasing girls. If he continues like this, the road will only get longer and longer. Chen Xinan skimmed over the documents in his hand as he talked. Oh, Mrs. Chen, are you saying that you're good at chasing people then? Haha, I don't need to chase anyone. Don't I have you? He liked that. You should stop meddling too, he added good-naturedly. I didn't, she refuted. I just got into the heat of the moment and said a few extra words, that's all. Oh, it's late now, President Chen. You need to sleep early. I promised to wait patiently for your return. You missed me? I missed you. After saying that, she realized how much she had been influenced by him. One day, long after Chen Xinan left for his business trip, Xin Haoyue finally experienced the impact of his absence. When she came home from work that day, she suddenly felt that something was missing. After making dinner, she realized she had subconsciously ladled out an extra bowl of soup and had even cooked an extra serving of dishes. When she came out of her daze, she helplessly shook her head. Habits were really scary sometimes. Chen Xinan was swathed with work and couldn't call her until later in the night, at 11:30 in her time. She was just getting ready to retire for the day. As she listened to the exhaustion in his voice, she couldn't help but feel concerned. How's work? Busy? Whenever he talked to her about work, he always gave the same response. It's okay. She decided against asking again and instead changed the topic. When are you coming back? He mused. She smiled as she told him, Tonight, I accidentally prepared an extra serving for dinner. After I finished eating everything on my own, I was stuffed. Chen Xinan turned around and drew the long curtains behind him. As he stared out at the sun rising behind the glass, he said softly, If you miss me, I can go back immediately. Don't, work is important. I'll wait for you at home. Sleep early then. Good night. It was hard to sleep alone, but she had to bear with it. However, when Xin Haoyue got home from work the next day, she was surprised to see the lights on inside their house. For a moment, she froze, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the doorknob. The thought that there might be a burglar inside came to her. With her heart pounding, she tried to stop the trembling of her hands in order to dig out her phone and call the police. Just as she pulled out her phone and unlocked it, however, she heard a voice from the staircase. You're back. A deep, magnetic male voice. She whipped her head in the direction of that voice and saw Chen Xinan standing right below the staircase. His hair had grown a little longer, albeit messy. It gave him a sort of rogue, uninhibited appeal. Xin Haoyue's gaze stopped on his face, and her eyes flickered with a vague emotion. Then, without even changing her shoes first, she ran to him and threw herself into his embrace. How are you back already? Didn't a pitiful kitten call me last night and told me that she missed me very much? Like her, Chen Xinan had just gotten back not too long ago. The beige overcoat was still cold from the temperature outside, but instead of feeling chilled, Xin Haoyue felt a surge of warmth in her heart. That pitiful kitten definitely wasn't me. Oh? Are you sure? She nodded, then looked up and smiled broadly. I only said that I missed you, not that I missed you very much. Chen Xinan met her bright gaze and couldn't help but lower his head to kiss her. Her thick black eyelashes quivered a little, as did her body. Chen Xinan's eyes darkened as he held her tighter and closer, as though trying to mesh their two bodies together. Xin Haoyue closed her eyes and reciprocated his passionate kiss while instigating more with her hands. Once she finished unbuttoning his coat, she began to unbutton his shirt. A chuckle rumbled from his throat, which elicited her to give his lips a spiteful bite. You're not allowed to laugh. Haha. He picked her up and said, So you can set a fire, but I can't resist? Mrs. Chen, I'd like to protest this. Your protest is ineffective. We won't know until I try. As soon as his voice fell, she was pressed down on the sofa. When they were finished and she was so tired that she couldn't even lift a finger, she realized that the words, your protest is ineffective, were actually made especially for her. No matter how she hit him, bit him, grabbed him, or kissed him to get him to slow down, be more gentle, or to finish quicker, he ignored her every plead. Instead, he intentionally did the complete opposite, tossing her so much that she became breathless. Afterwards, he cleaned her up in the bathroom and made some dishes for dinner. However, she only ate a few bites before stopping. The refreshed look on Chen Xinan's face was replaced by a slight frown. You're not going to eat more? She tossed him a look. I'm tired, so I can't stomach anymore. It's all your fault. Chen Xinan, who had eaten his wife dry before feeding her food, felt at a loss. Helplessly, he handed her a bowl of soup and said, then drink more soup. Seeing that he had put effort into making the food, she received the bowl and slowly began to drink. When they were lying in bed, Xin Haoyue fought against her heavy eyelids to ask him, did you come back early because you finished the work, or did you just find time to come back for a visit? I have to go back tomorrow morning, he responded. Oh, okay, I see. She hugged him and didn't say anything else. Chen Xinan waited a few minutes, but she didn't speak again. Looking down, he realized that she had fallen asleep. He lowered his head and pressed a smile against her lips before saying, good night, my wife. When Xin Haoyue woke up the next morning, Chen Xinan was already gone. If it weren't for the soreness she felt in her entire body, constantly reminding her of their madness on the sofa last night, she would have thought his brief visit was just a dream. Fortunately, the separation didn't last long. In the middle of December, his business trip finally ended. However, it was just in time for her New Year's preparation and dress rehearsal. She had no choice but to work several days of overtime, and in the end, they couldn't even celebrate a day as significant as New Year's Eve together. On New Year's Eve, every celebrating family turned their TV on to watch the countdown and usher in the new year. When one host talked about the essential tradition of New Year's wishes, he asked the three other hosts what their New Year's wishes were. Xin Haoyue replied with a smile, I hope that my loved ones, as well as the people who love me, will remain healthy and happy in the new year. I also hope that the wishes of him and I will come true. It was obvious who she was referring to when said him. The elders of the Chen family were watching the broadcast together with Chen Xinan. They all turned their heads to look at him. He gave a slight smile and responded while typing on his phone. Didn't you say you wanted to have a grandchild to hug? All of our wishes can come true together. The three elders immediately knew what he was talking about. The couple was ready to have a child? Grandpa Chen resisted the urge to smile and reined in his excitement. That's more like it. Chen Xinan chuckled. They should have a child. That way she would have someone to accompany her when he was away on a business trip. And if they had a child, she wouldn't choose to do work over spending time with her family again. Having a child would be good. Thus, when she was sitting in his car after work, ready to go home, she found that his eyes were especially bright. Was it because of the holiday? He stared at her for a few moments before suddenly saying, Happy New Year, Mrs. Chen. You too, Mr. Chen, she responded, before leaning over to give him a kiss. His smile grew bigger. Since she had neglected him for so many days, she was worried about how she would make it up to him. Seeing his indifference, she silently chastised herself for overthinking. Once they reached the entrance of their house, Chen Xinan turned off the engine. Right after Xin Haoyue removed her seatbelt, she heard him murmur to himself, I wish my wish would come true too. What? For a moment, she didn't realize that he was referring to what she had said on the show. Let's have a child. What? What a random topic. She didn't know how to respond. So let's start with what we have to do first in order to have a child. Hey, Chen Xinan, we're inside a car. He had already pulled her into his arms. Don't worry, no one will come out at this one. They won't be able to see either. Hey. However, all of her protests were swallowed by his lips. Even worse was that he made her take the lead. After moving a few times on her own, she was too tired to move anymore. In the end, he had to take back the lead. After pushing the seats down flat, he let loose the wanton beast inside him. When they got out of the car, Chen Xinan had to carry her in. She felt very ashamed. As for Chen Xinan, who was determined to make a child, it was as though a switch had been flipped. All he thought about in a day was pressing her under him and giving her a thorough loving. Therefore, 1 month later when her auntie came, Xin Haoyue breathed a sigh of relief. She could finally sleep peacefully. On the other hand, Chen Xinan stared at her with some frustration. She didn't get pregnant. For the next 2 months, Chen Xinan exerted more and more effort until Xin Haoyue felt overwhelmed. However, her auntie continued to report on time every month. When she finally realized his intentions, she began to actively cooperate with him. One day, she nestled in his arms and softly said, About the child? We should just let fate run its course, you know? He didn't respond. The child will come, I believe it, she added. He took her hand and kissed it. However, despite all that had been said, the months of loving had caused a certain addiction and a few improper ideas to sprout in his mind. One Saturday, he was working overtime while she was resting. He called her while he was in the office and said he wanted to eat her homemade food. Xin Haoyue cooked and even diligently delivered it to him. But she had underestimated his shamelessness. He wanted to eat her food, more like he wanted to eat her. Xin Haoyue, who was soon pressed against his office desk, had to bite her lips in order to prevent the improper sounds threatening to spill from her lips. Thus, Chen Xinan decided to work harder and reach for a yard after taking an inch. Eventually, she couldn't help but toss away his suit jacket and try to tear open his shirt. However, her strength wasn't enough. Chen Xinan chuckled and kindly unbuttoned his shirt for her. Without hesitation, she opened her mouth and bit him on the shoulder. "Ha! How fierce!" he breathed out before resuming his movements with equal fierceness. Xin Haoyue gave a muffled harumph and silently cursed him numerous times. Despicable wolf in sheep's clothing, a hooligan dressed like a gentleman. Ever since she experienced firsthand how impressive Chen Xinan's fighting capacity was, Xin Haoyue became extra cautious around him. For example, she refused to deliver food to the company again. No matter how he coaxed her with sweet words, she warned herself to not be swayed. God knew how guilty Assistant Wang's meaningful stare had made her feel when she walked out of Chen Xinan's office that day. Her face had turned completely red. However, though she could avoid it in the daytime, she was helpless at night. When late May came around, Xin Haoyue found that her stamina could no longer keep up with his. Therefore, she could only hug his arm and plead in a childish, spoiled manner, telling him that she was very busy with work during the day and wanted to rest at night. Chen Xinan considered it for a while before agreeing. However, there was one condition. Then in the future, you have to compensate me. When was the future? Xin Haoyue didn't know. One should live in the present, so she hurriedly nodded. Okay, I'll always listen to you in the future. After that, she was able to get a few rare days of full rest. It wasn't until early June that she suddenly noticed Chen Xinan's interest in those activities had declined. When they were both in the mood, he would kiss her or start to touch her. But he never took it any further than that. Even if the two of them were heavily panting and bothered, he would still somehow manage to control himself and drag his body into the bathroom for a cold shower. Eventually, his restraint caused her to feel concerned. One day, after she finished conducting an interview and was waiting below a staircase for her colleagues, Xin Haoyue happened to bump into Sheng Wenyang. So enemies really do meet on a narrow road. Sheng Wenyang was wearing a plain off-shoulder dress. Though her complexion was a little haggard, it was easy to see that she was in high spirits. Beside her stood a short-haired woman wearing black dress pants and a blue off-shoulder blouse. When Sheng Wenyang saw Xin Haoyue from a distance, she stood dazed for a moment before walking over. "What a coincidence, Miss Xin." She greeted her with a smile. Xin Haoyue didn't want to get involved with Sheng Wenyang, so she only smiled faintly and didn't say much. Sheng Wenyang paid her attitude no heed and turned her head to say a few words in English to the woman beside her. Xin Haoyue understood. "Do you know who she is? She's Chen Xinan's wife, your nominal lady boss." The woman looked surprised. Then she smiled at Xin Haoyue and said in Chinese, "So you're Miss Xin. I've heard a lot about you from Anan." "Anan?" Suddenly, Xin Haoyue smiled. "Miss Sheng, and this unknown Miss, I'm sure you're aware that Miss is used to refer to an unmarried woman. As the two of you know, I am married to Chen Xinan. Please call me Mrs. Chen from now on, otherwise my husband might get upset." The short-haired woman slightly raised an eyebrow, while Sheng Wenyang maintained her smile. "Xin Haoyue, you may not know, but she is a genius designer scouted by Chen Xinan from abroad. When he left the country a few years ago, one of the reasons was to bring her back to China." Xin Haoyue's eyes flashed and she didn't speak. Sheng Wenyang went on. "Coincidentally, she and I graduated from the same college. We were even close friends." "Wow, birds of a feather really do flock together. You both like Chen Xinan too, so as fellow sufferers, I'm sure you can comfort each other well." Xin Haoyue laughed. After saying that, she couldn't be bothered to see their reactions. "Please make yourselves at home here. I won't be staying to accompany you," she tossed over her shoulder before leaving. As she strode away on her high heels, with her chin held high, she suddenly felt dizzy. Her abdomen was also uncomfortable. As she strode away on her high heels, with her chin held high, she suddenly felt dizzy. Her abdomen was also uncomfortable. She bore with the pain until she got into her car, then she leaned back and closed her eyes for a while. When she felt a bit better, she opened her eyes. Forgetting what Sheng Wenyang had told her, Xin Haoyue thought of a more important matter. Wasn't her auntie half a month late already? She reached for her forehead, speechless at herself. Had she been so busy lately that she even forgot about her period? Maybe the fatigue from her overtime during the new year was finally catching up to her. Therefore, after she got home, she immediately went to sleep without even changing her clothes. When Chen Xinan returned, he noticed that the lights were off, but her shoes and bags were there. He paused for a few seconds before heading directly to the bedroom. Flicking on the light, he saw a little lump in the middle of their large bed. However, when he walked over and checked her forehead, there was no fever. Xin Haoyue had woken up the moment he turned on the light. She stretched out her hand to shield her eyes but didn't say anything. Chen Xinan immediately noticed her unusual behavior. He drew her into his arms and asked, "Did something happen during work today?" She rubbed her face against his chest in a lazy manner. "No, work went smoothly, I just feel a little tired." His eyes brightened slightly as he said, "Then you should have a good rest. I'll make dinner tonight." "Well, obviously, if you're not going to cook it, then who will?" She didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered what Sheng Wenyang had said. Was it really because of her outstanding talent that she was brought back personally by Chen Xinan? Chen Xinan? He looked down at her unhappy face. She paused. Never mind. I don't have much of an appetite today. You should make less food for dinner. He fell silent for a moment before answering. Then you should continue sleeping. I'll call you when I'm done. Okay. Chen Xinan went downstairs and decided to make a call. Excuse me, Dr. Su, could you answer a question for me? If my wife's menstrual period is half a month late and she's sleeping longer, feeling more fatigued, and having unusual mood swings, could she be pregnant? He listened patiently to the doctor's long reply before saying, Then, do you have time tomorrow? I would like to bring my wife to the hospital for a checkup. Yes, okay. I'll see you tomorrow. When he hung up the phone, he couldn't help the smile that took over his face. He had noticed the delay of her menstrual period half a month ago and began to restrain himself then. She was sleeping much more than usual recently, even when she had no reason to be. He didn't want to put pressure on her, so he didn't remind her about her period. However, her behavior today confirmed his speculation even further. Their child had finally arrived. He had to start doing research on how to take care of a pregnant woman. After making a simple dinner, Chen Xinan went upstairs and found Xin Haoyue sitting on their bed, holding her lower abdomen with a pained expression on her face. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed. Seeing this, he hurried to her side. What's wrong? My stomach hurts. It's coming in bursts, but sometimes it doesn't feel too bad. I think my auntie is coming soon. Chen Xinan didn't think so. He quickly grabbed a thin coat and put it on her before picking her up. It's summer, she protested. Who knew how many people would laugh at them if she went out with a coat on? It's summer, she protested. Who knew how many people would laugh at them if she went out with a coat on? He didn't care, but his expression was slightly stern. I'm taking you to the hospital. It's not that serious. I'll be fine after a while. Chen Xinan stopped walking, flat looked at her and said solemnly, No, we're going. I can't let anything happen to you and our child. Child? Now that he mentioned it, she finally realized. She was pregnant? After carefully counting the days since her last menstrual period and taking into consideration the subtle changes that happened to her body recently, it all made sense. She just couldn't believe that she was finally pregnant. The news came too suddenly. She was in a daze the entire drive to the hospital. Meanwhile, for the first time in his life, Chen Xinan was nervous about driving. He hated that he couldn't just rush to the hospital already, but he was worried that doing so would bring her more discomfort. When they finally arrived, he asked her, How are you feeling now? She shook her head. Chen Xinan's gaze sunk, then he reached out and carried her out of the car. Inside the hospital, the doctor was already expecting them. It felt like time had stopped as they waited for the pregnancy results. Seeing his wife turn pale, Chen Xinan drew her into his arms again and comforted her. It'll be okay, she nodded. When the results came out, Dr. Su called them in with a smile. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen is already 6 months along, but since this is your first child, you should be extra careful. Mr. Chen, you need to pay attention to her mood. Mrs. Chen, the abdominal pain you felt today was most likely caused by an excessive emotional stimulation. You should be more careful next time and try not to be affected too much by your emotions, lest they harm the baby. Xin Haoyue was stunned and subconsciously looked at Chen Xinan. He held her hand and reassured her as he asked the doctor about other precautions. From start to finish, he seemed perfectly calm, making Xin Haoyue think that he was unhappy about the pregnancy. On their way home, he drove slowly and steadily. Xin Haoyue stroked her belly and thought that it was a very delicate feeling. A new life was inside? Chen Xinan turned to her, his expression still mild. Xin Haoyue met his gaze and asked, You're not happy? What happened to you today? He responded with another question. She furrowed her brows and thought for a moment before saying, Sheng Wenyang said you went abroad and personally brought a woman back to the company. Who? She really wanted to get a bag and hit him with it. How am I supposed to know who she is? Don't listen to Sheng Wenyang's nonsense. When did I bring a woman back with me to the company? Xin Haoyue huffed as she reminded him. A short-haired woman with big eyes and white skin. She's in the planning department. He had to think for a while before remembering. That's the designer Mao Xiwan found. We happened to be on the same flight, he admitted. I don't even know her name. So you're saying you don't know what sort of intentions she has towards you either? Many people have intentions towards me, he said helplessly, reaching out to pinch her cheek. Mrs. Chen, how come I've never seen you get so jealous until now? She knew she was being unreasonable, but she couldn't help sulking. Quickly, she came up with the reason. I bet it's your son kicking up trouble. He lifted an eyebrow and lit a candle for his unborn daughter. My daughter is so pitiful. Didn't I say that it's a son? Yes. Whether it's a son or a daughter, it doesn't matter. Chen Xinan could hardly wait to share the good news of Xin Shi's pregnancy with the Chen and Xin family elders. When both families heard the news, they were naturally overjoyed. Old Grandpa Chen even mentioned for them to move back to the Chen family so that the two experienced ones, Wang Yinlin and sister-in-law Song, could help take care of the baby. At the very least, it would be much more reliable than having the two of them staying outside. Chen Xinan thought about it and agreed. After returning home, he brought some of the necessities and left for the old family home. Xin Haoyue didn't mind either. It was a good thing to have someone more experienced give you advice. When Wang Yinlin saw her, she took her hand with a smile and shared her own bitter experiences while carrying Chen Xinan. Xin Haoyue soaked up this information with gusto, whereas Chen Xinan felt helpless at the side. Why did she make it sound so much like he was tormenting her? When they saw how immersed the two of them were in their conversation, he ignored them and went up to the study to show off to his grandfather. Xin Haoyue finally had some quiet time when night came. When he saw Chen Xinan climbing into bed, she was just about to talk to him about their plans when she heard him say, "For work? You should take it easy." The one thing she could never let go of was her work. Even though she did have to pay extra attention for the sake of her child just for the first few months, she still argued, "Can't you let me continue? Or maybe I can take a vacation and go back after 3 months." Chen Xinan reminded her, "You want to go on TV with a baby bump?" From what he could remember, he never saw a show hosted by someone while carrying a baby. Xin Haoyue couldn't help but feel defeated. "I'm preparing for a live performance at the Spring Festival Gala. We've already progressed halfway and this is a very important program. The director already approved it. Even if the show was a success, you'll be about 8 or 9 months at that time. Are you really sure you'll be able to host it then?" Xin Haoyue went silent. "Fine, it's impossible." She gave in. "Then, there's no way around it then. I can only have my colleagues take over." Xin Haoyue embraced him and cradled in his arms. A little unhappy, she said, "I'm making a big sacrifice for your precious little child." Chen Xinan stroked her hair. Even though he knew how she felt, he still asked deliberately, "So, which is more important, your work or the baby?" Xin Haoyue's eyes narrowed with amusement. "Well, naturally, it'll have to be your baby." Chen Xinan looked at her cheerful eyes with amusement and couldn't help but hold her face and give her a deep kiss. After resting at home for a few days, Xin Haoyue realized that she had a lot more time now on the weekdays. After waking up every morning, she would go for a walk with Grandpa Chen. Then, after breakfast, she would water the flowers with him and trim the plants before going off to read a book or playing the piano. In the afternoon, she would either take a nap or play some chess with Grandpa Chen. Sometimes, she would also go shopping with Wang Yinlin. However, when it came to shopping, Chen Xinan would protect her very carefully by her side, afraid that she may fall or bump into anyone. After Wang Yinlin went shopping with her a few times and being driven by Chen Xinan for all of those times, she couldn't help but laugh and say to Xin Haoyue, "Being the daughter-in-law carries more weight after all. I remember how I couldn't even get him to agree to come out with me to buy a gift in the past." Xin Haoyue looked at Chen Xinan and smiled, saying, "It's not me who carries the weight, Mom. I think it's your grandchild." Wang Yinlin turned to look at Chen Xinan, and when she saw that he wouldn't even spare a glance at them, she laughed. The rest of Xin Haoyue's days at home could be described as very free and comfortable experience. It was only natural that she would get a little impatient after sitting around for so many days. One evening, she looked through Weibo and saw several popular videos related to dancing. She was really immersed in it. As she was watching, she didn't forget to complain to Chen Xinan, "I can't even dance right now." Thinking about it, the days before getting pregnant were nicer after all. Chen Xinan, who was currently flipping through his book, raised his eyes to look at her and asked her back, "Why? Don't you feel happy right now?" "Haha, I'm just kidding. Life is good. Besides having nothing to do, everything else is better than I expected. If you feel bored, why don't I take you back to the Xin family home for a few days?" Xin Haoyue was overjoyed. "Okay." Chen Xinan looked at her and smiled before shaking his head helplessly. "I'm really being nicer and nicer to you. Would you treat me badly, though?" Chen Xinan put down his book and came closer for a kiss. I wouldn't dare." Xin Haoyue smiled warmly. There truly wasn't a better time than now. After staying in the Xin family home for a few days, Xin Haoyue never expected that Chen Xinan would rush straight over there after work every day. Without a single word of complaint, he stayed with her in the Xin family home for a few days. One afternoon, when Bai Ning was making homemade dumplings with Xin Haoyue, she expressed with satisfaction, "That Xinan kid is a fine man. Just look at you. You haven't been pregnant for long, and your bump hasn't even shown up, but he would look at you as if he'd rather just pick you up anytime you walked up or down the stairs." Ha. Xin Haoyue felt too embarrassed to tell her that when she was at the Chen family home and when the others weren't around, he did in fact, carry her up the stairs several times. "I know he's good to me, Mom. A man like that is hard to find. When the baby is born, you'll have to put even more effort into living a good life together. Don't worry, Mom. We'll be fine." "All right, I'll let my mind to rest." After Xin Chen found out that she was pregnant, he prepared many gifts for the nephew he hadn't met yet, and even began preparing a baby room at the Xin family home. When Xin Haoyue saw him directing the movers who were carrying the crib, she teased, "Are you preparing for sister-in-law in advance, brother?" Xin Chen glared at her and refused to answer. "All right, I won't mention it anymore, okay?" Xin Chen said, "It's best to live a virtuous life, especially when it comes to you. Chen Xinan is already questionable. What's going to happen to my nephew if you're like this as well?" Xin Haoyue was speechless. Subconsciously, she argued back for Chen Xinan. What part about him is questionable? Xin Chen waved his hand to shoo her away. The movers were bringing things in and out of the house, and she wasn't even worried that they'd bump into her accidentally. So he shooed her off and said, "Go back to your room to rest, otherwise go downstairs to the living room. What is a pregnant woman like you blocking the way for?" Ever since finding out she was pregnant, Xin Haoyue really found herself with less rights to speak. "Don't talk badly about him, brother." When Xin Cheng saw her sticking out her elbow, he snorted, "He's bad enough without me having to say anything. You don't understand how things are like in the business world, so stop asking. Go away." Xin Haoyue felt a little sad. Was she really so unwelcome? Wasn't she even allowed to stick around to see the future room of her child? In the end, she couldn't do anything other than return to her room obediently. After returning back to her room, Xin Haoyue had nothing to do, so she could only send out some messages to pester Chen Xinan. When his subordinates saw their boss suddenly getting the rare message during their meeting, they were all stunned. Xin Haoyue returned back to the old Chen family residence after staying with the Jins for some time. The plan to go out for a walk every morning was back on the agenda again. Only, it wasn't just Grandpa Chen with her on the walk this time. There was Chen Xinan too. Moreover, Chen Xinan, who had come over to jog with them, was only doing it by name, as he would barely run one lap before slowing down to walk slowly next to her. Naturally, Xin Haoyue was happy about this. Through their walk, she kept holding his hands, swinging them back and forth, while chatting idly with him. Chen Xinan didn't mind it either and would go along with her each time. However, pitiful Grandpa Chen could only walk silently by himself as he watched the couple. Ah, how he had forgotten his grandpa as soon as he's married. At about 4 months into the pregnancy, Xin Haoyue began feeling the effects of morning sickness. Even though it wasn't bad enough that she would vomit whatever she ate, she would still throw up quite a few times each day. Chen Xinan saw it happen a few times and couldn't help but worry. He called a doctor to ask, but found out that this was normal. His face darkened as he felt helpless. The only way Aunt Song could help out was by working hard on preparing her dishes so that they were both nutritious and appetizing. Even though Xin Haoyue ate quite a lot, she vomited quite a lot as well. In just half a month, the baby fat she took much effort to gain was all lost again. When Chen Xinan saw how much she suffered, he expressed his feelings to her one night when they were holding each other in bed, saying, "After this baby is born, let's not have any more." Xin Haoyue was quite drowsy at this time. When she heard her words, she sobered up instantly and opened her eyes to ask, "Why?" Chen Xinan's face was dark. "Let's just not." Xin Haoyue looked at him and asked, "But didn't we already agree? One boy and one girl, they'll both have matching names." "I don't want it to burden you," Chen Xinan spoke with pity. "When I see you throw up like that, it breaks my heart." "I'll be fine. It'll be over after a while." "Is it really fine?" Xin Haoyue comforted him in turn. "This is just how it's like to have a baby. Everything will be better once it's over." Chen Xinan held her tight and didn't speak. However, that furrow in his brows never smoothed out. At about 7 months, Xin Haoyue's morning sickness was over, and her face had also regained its luster. Only, her stomach now looked like an inflated balloon that grew bigger each day. When Zhang Qin and Gu Tong found time to visit her, they felt extremely nervous to see her struggling to walk up and down the stairs with her big belly that was supported by her slender legs. On the other hand, Xin Haoyue felt free and easy. When the baby was about 8 or 9 months in, Xin Haoyue felt it was harder and harder to fall asleep. Sometimes her feet would get cramped, and she could only bear the pain with gritted teeth. But Chen Xinan would be able to wake up immediately each time to help her massage her legs without her needing to ever ask. Through the dim lights of the bedside table, Xin Haoyue watched his profile as he worked and felt her heart well up with emotions. "Chen Xinan, do you regret meeting me?" "Huh?" Xin Haoyue was staring at him, seemingly waiting for his answer seriously. Chen Xinan laughed. "I guess it's true when they say that a woman tends to overthink things when she's pregnant. So, do you regret it?" She seemed insistent. Chen Xinan stared straight at her with his deep eyes, and he came close. Dropping a light peck on his lips, he spoke softly. "I love you. In a few days, the child will be born." Xin Haoyue was wearing a gray fringed shawl as she watched the droplets of rainwater flow constantly down the glass window. Drip after drip, the droplets slithered down quickly. Meanwhile, the sky was still dark. This rain had already been going on for more than a week. When Chen Xinan came in with a glass of water, he was greeted with the scene of her daydreaming by the glass window. He raised his head and followed her gaze. The heavy rain had been pouring for so many days, but it didn't seem to show any signs of stopping. The clouds in the sky were thick and dark. If this went on, then some places would inevitably flood. Chen Xinan saw her frowning from afar and knew that she was worrying over things. So, he walked over and handed her the glass, saying, "Aren't you tired standing up for so long? Why don't you go lay down?" Xin Haoyue accepted the cup of water and took a sip. The temperature of the water was just right. She raised her head and looked at him, then leaned into his arms, saying, "I don't know why, but I can't help feeling uneasy." "You're just overthinking things. It'll be fine." Xin Haoyue smiled and pretended to relax. I think it's probably just the rain. It's been so many days, but it still won't stop. Just thinking about it gives me a headache. It'll be over in a few days. You should go to sleep. I'll wake you up in the evening. Didn't you sleep for just a few hours last night? Xin Haoyue pondered over it and agreed. All right, will you join me? Sure. Chen Xinan laid down with her for some time. Only after seeing her fall asleep did he get back up again. Beside Assistant Wang's number, he had someone else's number set to mute whenever they called. Chen Xinan's eyes trailed down for a moment, and he returned the call. Chen Xinan, trying to get a hold of you is tough work. Chen Xinan believed that he wouldn't be calling him if there wasn't anything. Without beating around the bush, he asked straightforwardly. What is it? Speak. It's that she you personally brought in yourself. She's kinda kooky and won't stop talking about wanting to see your wife. She? Quite naturally, Chen Xinan recalled a few things. Seeing that he wasn't going to answer, the man went on. I'm just mentioning it. Whether you see her or not is your choice. I don't even know what she's been up to these days, but she keeps saying that everything is going to end. Do you believe her, Chen Xinan? Chen Xinan raised his lips into a disdainful arc. I don't. Even if he never believed it, Chen Xinan still went to prison the next day. When the disheveled Shi saw Chen Xinan, her eyes lit up. With eyes wide, she said, pleased, I knew it was you. Chen Xinan looked at her with a blank expression and did not plan to speak. Shi began laughing even more. Chen Xinan, you're the one I actually wanted to see, not that bitch Xin Haoyue. I've had to see that abominable face for more than a decade, and I've been praying that she'll die with a broken corpse since ages ago. What did she do wrong for you to hate her so much? When Shi saw that he was finally willing to answer her, she felt even happier. I hate her? Of course, I would. Even if she's my half-sister, why is she the only one that appears in my dad's eyes? No matter how well I do, how hard I work, he would never even glance at me. Xin Haoyue will always be the only daughter in his heart. Even if she was never willing to speak with and accept him, he still treats her so well. Xin Haoyue, what did she do to deserve that?